Sometimes it's just hard figuring out who you should be instead of who you want to be.
I have always found Fjord, a half-orc hexblade warlock turned paladin of the Wildmother, to be one of Critical Role's most interesting characters. His entire journey is defined by struggle, power, and ultimately self-acceptance. Beneath his carefully crafted facade is something deeply human, a young man plagued by insecurity and desperate to prove his worth, and unsure of what it truly means to be strong. Fjord's story is not just the story of a powerful hero, it is a story of masculinity, self-doubt, and true confidence. In this video, we'll delve into how Fjord's character arc deconstructs traditional ideas of masculinity, how his struggles with identity shape his choices, and how his journey from a self-doubting, insecure sailor to a true leader offers a fresh take on what it really means to be powerful. Before we dive into how Fjord's story really explores insecurity, masculinity, and redemption, we need to know at least a little bit about him. Raised as an orphan in the Driftwood Asylum in Port de Marly on the Menagerie Coast, Fjord was in all ways unremarkable. As the only half-orc in the orphanage, he was relentlessly teased for being different. Fjord never really felt like he belonged. Not only was he the only half-orc at the orphanage, the headmaster also gave him the last name Stone to remind him that, like a stone, he had been cast aside. The other children, led by a half-elf boy Sabian, also bullied Fjord relentlessly, especially for his tusks. It is because of this, and despite the pain that it caused him, that the young half-orc began to shorten his tusks, even as they continued to grow. Fjord continued to shorten his teeth even into adulthood, largely out of habit, but he was still self-conscious when people noticed his tusks.
You see very short, nubby teeth with scratches and divots and chips on the top.
On all of the teeth, or just on
the tusks?
When Fjord was 17, the Driftwood Asylum was visited by Captain Vandrin of the Tide's Breath, who came looking for new crew members. Fjord volunteered, despite the fact that Sabian also did. Over time, Fjord eventually became the ship's first mate and quartermaster, and he and Vandrin became very close. Over time, the pair's relationship became very similar to that of father and son. On a journey back to Port de Marly, Fjord walked in on Sabian lighting a fuse in the cargo hold, which led to an explosion. Fjord was knocked into the water and, in a desperate state of panic, subconsciously agreed to a pact with Ukotoa, which, upon waking up later on Bezaft Isle, he wouldn't remember. Fjord began to imitate Vandrin, both in bearing and in accent, and noticed that when he did, people listened to him and seemed to respect him.
And the first time I adopted that speech and changed the way that I looked, everyone listened. Everyone was quiet. That felt better.
For much of his early arc, Fjord is performing confidence. He is playing a part, borrowing power, and shaping himself into someone he thinks people will respect. This is clear from the moment we meet him. His voice is deliberate, controlled, and far removed from his natural accent.
Yeah, I'm here too.
Oh, what?
Oh no. I'm a half-orc, sitting here in kind of beat-up leathers. Have a big scar across my face.
He is imitating someone he admires. Vandrin, the man who took him in, the first figure of authority he ever respected. But this version of himself is fragile because the moment that mask begins to slip, the moment he is confronted with something beyond his control, he turns to something even more dangerous. When the Tide's Breath was wrecked and Vandrin disappeared, so too did Fjord's closest friend and only father figure. Fjord took Vandrin's lessons to heart, but that's not all he took. He also took Vandrin's voice, his posture, his approach to the world, because without them, what is he? Just an orphan, just a half-orc, just another nobody. Fjord does not see himself as worthy of respect unless he becomes someone else. someone stronger, someone more powerful. And for someone who has spent his life borrowing confidence, that leaves a void, one that ukotoa was all too happy to fill in Fjord's desperation. With the falchion gifted to him by ukotoa, Fjord felt strong. He was no longer just a lost sailor, he became a warlock, a force to be reckoned with. But even here, the power is not truly his. For all his confidence, Fjord is terrified because deep down, he does not believe that strength is something inherent. It is something given, something taken. And if it is something given, then it can just as easily be taken away. Not to mention that ukotoa does not just offer strength. He enforces dependency. Like a predator, he isolates Fjord, whispering to him in moments of vulnerability, reinforcing the idea that without his patron's gifts, Fjord is nothing.
Learn. Grow. Provoke. Consume.
Learn, grow, provoke, consume. I don't understand.
Reward.
Ukotoa plays on a toxic, distorted version of masculinity, the idea that strength must come from dominance, that power is something to be wielded over others, and that without it, one is weak. This is the same fear that Fjord has carried his whole life, the fear of powerlessness, of being small, of being insignificant. This is the trap of performative masculinity. Power as something external, something conditional. Ukotoa does not give Fjord strength, he lends it, and like so many other men, Fjord fears that without it, he will be nothing at all. But the true test of his strength isn't in how he wields this power. It's in whether he can let it go.
I will take the sword and hold it against my chest. And I will say, you need me more than I need you. Give it back.
Fjord's transformation doesn't come from wielding more power. It comes from redefining what power actually means. Since the very beginning, Fjord has sought power from borrowed strength. He has imitated Vandren, relied on ukotoa's magic, and built a persona designed to command respect. For a long time, he believed that power was something you either had or didn't, something you could take or lose. Worth noting too is that ukotoa's brand of power is built on intimidation, on possession, on dominance. The great Leviathan offers strength, but it is a strength built on fear, both the fear that he can inspire in others, and more insidiously, the fear that without this power, Fjord is nothing at all. This undoubtedly had an effect on Fjord's perception of power and strength. The Mighty Nine's unwavering support plays a pivotal role here. Unlike Fjord's belief that strength must be earned through dominance, the party shows him that strength can also come from vulnerability and trust. Fjord witnesses firsthand how the group lift each other up, how Bo's sharpness is tempered by Jester's warmth, how Caleb's self-doubt is eased by their friendship. They succeed not by overpowering one another, but by embracing each other's strengths and filling in for their weaknesses. This environment of compassion and mutual reliance shows Fjord that power doesn't have to mean control. It can mean connection too. At one point, the Mighty Nine make their way to Kravarad, a volcano amongst a number of Alps. It is during the night that they spend here that Fjord makes a decision that will shape the rest of his character arc. He metaphorically and literally throws his bond with ukotoa away after his patron stripped him of his powers, not for the first time. He achieves this by firstly stabbing himself with his iconic falchion, the Sword of Fathoms, before throwing it into the volcano's magma. Fjord immediately informs Caduceus, a fellow member of the Mighty Nine, about what he's done, and Caduceus, after healing his friend, is nothing but supportive and encouraging of Fjord, even commending him for winning a battle of wills to take the first step in freeing himself from ukotoa. Come the next morning, Fjord stops using Vandren's voice, knowingly speaking with his true accent for the first time around the party, and explains that he adopted Vandren's accent in an effort to gain the respect that Vandren had had. He tells them that he threw the falchion into the lava, suggesting that the reason was to destroy the final key to release ukotoa, so that no one in the future would fall under its sway. He admits that he is now powerless, but the party rallies around him, offering him various magic items and reassuring him that he is not, in fact, as powerless as he thinks he is. This really marks the turning point in Fjord's arc, this moment of vulnerability that he shares where he potentially expects to be seen as less valuable to the party, and that he is unconditionally supported through. In many ways, this single moment is instrumental in Fjord beginning to redefine what strength, confidence, and masculinity really are.
Fjord. The Rangers have had a sighting. A troop of 5 approaching. They're asking if they are to engage.
Yes.
What?
You're a bastard.
Fjord's journey is, at its core, a story of redemption, but not in the traditional sense. He is not a man trying to atone for past sins. Rather, he's a man trying to unlearn the lessons that shaped him. His redemption is not about seeking forgiveness. It's about redefining what strength means and allowing himself to be someone different. But to understand this fully, we have to examine the two competing forces that shape his arc. Ukotoa, who represents toxic masculinity, power through dominance, intimidation, and fear, and the Wild Mother, who represents healthy masculinity, power through balance, trust, and responsibility. And the key to Fjord's redemption lies in his ability to reject one and embrace the other. When Fjord first gains ukotoa's power, it is intoxicating. For the first time in his life, he felt strong, dangerous, and respected. But what he didn't realise, at least initially, is that this power came at the cost of his autonomy. Ukotoa's demands were framed as tests of strength, but in reality, they were acts of control. Each demand comes with an underlying threat. If you want to be truly strong, you will obey me. If you do not, I will take all of your strength away. This is where ukotoa mirrors the most toxic elements of masculinity, the belief that strength must be constantly proven, that power is something you must seize and defend, and that submission is the ultimate weakness. Ukotoa doesn't just want Fjord to wield power, he wants Fjord to become possessed by it. This is exactly why Fjord's rejection of ukotoa is such a radical, redemptive act. When he throws away the Sword of Fathoms, he isn't just rejecting ukotoa's magic, he is rejecting the very idea that strength must come from dominance. And that is what true redemption looks like in Fjord's story. Not conquering an external enemy, but overcoming an internal lie that was planted in him from the beginning. But this is only half the story, because in rejecting toxic power, Fjord has to replace it with something new. After severing his bond with ukotoa, Fjord is left adrift. For the first time, he is without a patron, a mentor, or a guiding hand, and vitally, it was at this moment that he chose not to fall back into old patterns. Instead, he opens himself to a different kind of power, one that does not command or demand, but nurtures and sustains. The Wild Mother, in many ways, represents a completely new model of masculinity for Fjord, one rooted in protection rather than possession, in growth rather than control. Unlike ukotoa, the Wild Mother does not grant power in exchange for servitude. She does not test him, she does not tempt him, or force him into submission.
And you swear to follow this inspiration, to seek out the mysteries hidden beneath the waves and beyond that eternal horizon.
Fuck yes.
Then your path is clear.
Instead, she offers partnership. In choosing the Wild Mother, Fjord embraces a fundamentally different understanding of what it means to be strong in 3 key ways. Strength is not about proving yourself, it is about trusting yourself. Power is not about what you can take, it is about what you can protect. And true leadership is not about control, it is about care. This shift is essential to his redemption because it is not just about rejecting toxic masculinity, it is about embracing a healthier, more balanced version of it. Fjord does not lose himself in passivity or self-doubt after abandoning ukotoa. Instead, he steps into a new form of power, one that is deeply connected, deeply present, and deeply secure. A perfect example of this newfound power, strength, and confidence comes towards the very end of the campaign. Fjord is left to make a seemingly impossible decision. After being made aware by Essek, one of the party's allies, that their nemesis are closing in on their location, Fjord is called upon to decide whether the Mighty Nine's allies should engage, potentially buying the party some time to finish their long rest and regain all of their abilities at the certain death of their allies, or to save the lives of their allies at the cost of not being fully rested and prepared for the fight to come. Fjord makes the impossible decision for the Mighty Nine's allies to engage. That single moment, ultimately, shows how far Fjord has come on his journey. From the half-orc who, when introducing himself at the beginning of the campaign, seemed hesitant to share much more than "I'm here too," to the commendable leader with the calm confidence who made the decision that the half-orc at the beginning of the campaign would have found impossible to make. Fjord's story is, in many ways, a classic fantasy arc. A young, unremarkable man is granted power, struggles to wield it, and ultimately becomes something greater than he once was. But what makes Fjord's journey truly compelling is how he defines that greatness. For much of his life, he believed that strength was something you had or you didn't, that it was something to take, to wield, and to prove. He imitated Vandran to gain respect. He clung to ukotoa's gifts to feel powerful, and when those things were stripped away, he believed he had nothing. But Fjord's true strength was never in what he borrowed, it was in what he chose. He chose to abandon a power that demanded fear. He chose to embrace a strength rooted in trust. He chose to shed the masks he built to protect himself and instead allow himself to be truly seen. And in doing so, he challenges the very idea of what it means to be strong. Fjord's story tells us that power is not about control. It is about care, that masculinity is not about dominance, it is about self-awareness, honesty, and responsibility. That true confidence is not about proving you are strong, it is about knowing you don't have to. In the end, Fjord does not conquer the world, he does not become an unshakable warrior or an untouchable legend. Instead, he becomes a man who trusts himself, and for a character who spent so long afraid of his own reflection, that is the most powerful transformation of all.
I think I'm becoming comfortable with the idea of failing with you. Makes it a little less lonely.